Hello and welcome. Melinda Nicci, Edi Pasalis. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm actually very excited that we're talking about this topic. It's the number one talked about topic last year, the number one podcast in most countries actually as well. So it just shows that the demand for knowledge and demand for solutions is very, very high on people's list. So we're going to come from the angle of business in relation to menopause. What do we do? How do we do it? What solutions are you guys providing that ultimately fill a huge gap and a huge need? So first off, very exciting. Melinda, let's go with you first. Connect the dots for me from where you started in your career to how you got to where you are today. Give us a little bit of those dots.
Well, I grew up in South Africa, which is very different to growing up in the UK. I was very active, very sporty, spent my life on the sports field. So sports was an active physical activity was a very natural place for me to go when I started university. I studied psychology. And then I did my master's in sports psychology, so sports and exercise psychology. So kind of bringing those two worlds of psychology, sports, wellness, and well-being. And here's a fun fact. I was the very first qualified aerobics instructor in South Africa way
Wow.
back in the day. And we're talking about, I'm aging myself here, but the Jane Fonda days of like literally, high kicking and high impact aerobics and stuff like that. Anyway, so like I saw a need. I was involved in Virgin Active when it first started in South Africa, and like at the very beginning when there was no health clubs, and so I was part of kind of the founding team of, at the time it was a health and racket group, and we had like 4 or 5 clubs, and while I was there we grew to 67 clubs in 2 years. Now I was like in my early 20s, absolutely no idea what I was doing, and neither did anybody else, and we were just figuring it out. And I think one of the lessons of that early time was really how, to scale something, right, and to see what works and to learn really, really quickly about what works and what doesn't work. Anyway, so I was there for a number of years, and then I immigrated to the UK. And I started, well, actually, I was working for a couple of different health club companies in the UK, LA Fitness, Esporta, David Lloyd, doing a lot of consulting. Then I was pregnant. I felt pregnant. Went to my doctor in the UK, asked him what I can do, how I can exercise. I couldn't find any literature on keeping safe while I was pregnant. And he literally said to me, don't worry about it, sit on the sofa, eat some biscuits, and you will be fine. And of course, this is that mid-90s, and I was just completely and utterly shocked that this was the information that I was getting from a doctor. So I set about trying to understand how I could optimize my own health, what I needed to do, what I should avoid. So I did a ton of studying. I went to the US and did a course with Professor James Clapp, who runs, he actually wrote the very, very first book on physiological changes in the woman's body while she was pregnant during exercise. So I did a very short course while I was pregnant, and then came back and kind of tried to figure out a way for me to use that knowledge in my classes and everything. And fast forward to getting a book deal and doing a ton of workshops and classes. And then I developed Baby to Body, which was in its infancy. It was essentially a personal training plan. And I had like the first group classes, like tiny group classes. And then that became a digital product in 2016. And then we branched out into do like women's health in general. So we do everything from conception, pregnancy, postpartum, to perimenopause, menopause, and aging, hormonal health. And I've basically scaled that from the original, what can I do while I'm pregnant, question, to everything to do with women's health, because at every stage our bodies change, and at every stage we need to think about things in a different way, and there was just not enough information. And so, but now I actually think there's too much information. So I think bringing the science back to what is safe for me, what is useful for me, the efficacy, the evidence-based, that's all really, really important as well. And true to my roots of being science-based, that's what we do. So my company is called Body Collective, and we do women's health right from conception through to hormonal health, every stage of a woman's life. And yeah, we've got over 6 million women on our platform in 130 countries. Very proud of what we've done, but we're only scratching the surface and there's still a lot more to do.
I love it. Thank you, Melinda. It's great hearing that story again. And I'm glad that when I met you a couple of years back in London, you were at that baby to body, and it's been phenomenal to watch you and watch the space grow. So thank you. We're going to tease into that an awful lot more. But Edi, you also have an amazing background. Connect the dots for us from where you started to where you are today as well, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. So, my background is very different than Melinda's. My background, I've spent most of my career working at the intersection of well-being and leadership. I started out, did a undergraduate degree at Harvard in economics, then went off to business school because I thought I was going to, make a lot of money and save the world through business. Never quite found my sweet spot there. And after about 10 years, went and found the practice of yoga and decided that this was what I was going to give my life to, this kind of wisdom journey. And so did a total switch and just jumped out of my corporate life and became a yoga teacher, went to divinity school, studied Sanskrit, ancient Indian civilization, spirituality and healing, a real self-awareness journey. And in that era, I'll date myself too, Melinda. The only way to be connected to yoga was to be a yoga teacher at a studio, or to kind of be a solopreneur yoga person. And so I did that for almost a decade, and then realized this isn't for me either. The way of working this, there's something that's not true to me in this. And so after about 10 years, gave away all of my classes. I'd also started a business doing wedding ceremonies as part of this process, because people kept saying to me, I want something spiritual, but not religious. Can you hold space for us? Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll support you with the stress. I said, there's prenatal yoga. There should be prenuptial yoga. And I did that for a while. My business was called I Do Yoga.
Totally agree.
So, had an entrepreneurial element there, but it was very lonely, and it wasn't systemic enough for me at that point. And so again, I took another flying leap and just let everything go. And it's okay, I know, this isn't it. I have a sense that something else is arriving. And what I sort of followed my way forward to come back. I had done my yoga teacher training at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, and had worked specifically with a teacher there, Stephen Cope, who was the founder of the Institute for Extraordinary Living. And so I came and worked there and brought sort of the combination of my business background and my yoga background. And we developed evidence-based programming for professionals. So not only did we build sort of mind-body resilience programming that's appropriate for the workplace, we also partnered with researchers from Harvard and other places to study the impact, to really understand the implications of bringing these sorts of practices into the context of our work. And so for me, this is still many decades ago, the place where I think of where my current work starts, because I became very, very aware of how our relationship to ourselves and our own bodies deeply, deeply informs the quality of our leadership. There's a beautiful quote, Bill O'Brien, he's quoted Otto Scharmer and the Theory U folks quote him all the time, that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And so I've been very, very interested in how we cultivate, how we protect, how we care for this interior condition of our leadership. So while I was at Kripalu, I was on the leadership team there. It's in terms of organizations worldwide organizations, it's small. We are a $35 million nonprofit serving 40,000 people a year. But in terms of the yoga world, that's huge. And I was really proud to be on the leadership team, bringing this work out into the world. And then with the pandemic, the work that I had been doing came to a screeching halt because it was all in-person work. And so I had the opportunity. I had what I think of as a COVID sabbatical, which also for me paralleled. It was also a menopause sabbatical, because just before COVID is when I myself went through menopause or came into menopause. And so in that time of sitting really still and listening, it felt like, okay, here's another version of like letting it all go and see what comes. Really realized that my own personal experience of menopause, I was not prepared for it, despite the fact that I was working at the intersection of leadership and well-being for all these years. Menopause really threw me for a loop. I had significant vertigo for several months and ended up going on part-time disability. Nobody ever told me that vertigo could be connected to perimenopause. I had no idea. And so I realized, like, for all these years, I've been talking about mind-body practices in the context of our leadership. Not once in over 2 decades, not once had we ever mentioned menopause. It had never, ever came up. And when I was thinking about this, as I could feel like this is where I want to give my attention, because I saw in myself, and like the quality of suffering, even though I had all this background, it threw me for a loop. And I'm like, if you aren't already have a super healthy lifestyle, aren't already steeped in lots of leadership practices and techniques, how are you going to navigate this time? And then also looked at the women who were inspiring me, who were kind of ahead of me on the journey, shall we say, older women, more elder women. And I could see a real difference between the women who had chosen to befriend their bodies and their experience, and how they were vibrant and creative and alive, with those, excuse me, who were kind of fighting their body experience and they felt more brittle, more rigid, more bitter. And I was like, I want to be that path. I want to be the vital path. And I want to help other women be the vital path. Excuse me. So for me, I see menopause as a choice point, and I see my work as to help women make a choice for their own vitality in this time that supports both their well-being and also their leadership. So I have founded the Be Your Power, the Menopause Leadership Program, which we have delivered in Fortune 500 companies, for nonprofit organizations. We've done research on it. I'm very proud to have partnered with Alicia Grandy at Penn State. And we have now kind of documented proof that this program helps women cope, helps women feel better about themselves in the process of menopause, but also gives them a more developmental, positive orientation. It doesn't take away the suffering of menopause, because that's not realistic, but it brings a fuller picture of the possibilities that might come if we take menopause really, really seriously. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about this work and to spread the word that we can use menopause as a catalyst for growth.
I love what you're doing, and I want to tease in more into it, because there's a lot of dots in there that you do mention that I really want to understand better. Because to Melinda's point as well, we went from having very little science to having loads of science, lots of loads of noise, and we got to pull it back a little bit. And I'm conscious that, whether you're an employer or a leader, there's a conversation starting that a lot of us aren't comfortable with. So I'm free all of this, thankfully, but I'm also, what a physiology hat looking forward, going, I don't know enough. I should be well aware of what's coming down the track. And if it's, as a physiology background, I don't understand it. the people that are completely flying blind come into this going, I don't know what I don't know. And I need more information. I need some guidance. I need some curation. And I'm also very conscious that when we look at leadership, what can we say? How should we talk about it? So, Edi, we want to come back to all that because that's a complete, I would say, black box right now is what are you allowed to ask? What's the best approach to do as a leader, to be a supportive leader? And knowing that we're heading into the next couple of years where thankfully we've all found a voice that we're louder and we're more open to talking about it, that we're not going to be shying away from all of the, the brain fog and the depression and vertigo and all the symptoms that we know now, as well as that's growing. And I think there's 67 symptoms that seem to be bundled under menopause. So let's tease out a little bit. Melinda, can I go to you for a second in relation to the science? What should we be talking about? What should leaders, employers, just employees know about the science of menopause? And likewise, in your solution, how does it work? If I was to get onto the solution today, knowing that I'm 41, just past the threshold, no symptoms, nothing at this point, but I want to be figuring out, okay, where do I go? Walk me through a little bit of it. How does it work? And why should everyone be on board?
Well, I think the biggest problem is the elephant in the room is that it happens to every single woman on the planet.
Right.
And I think there's a lot that of mysticism and myths and misconceptions around that. And it's always been something that you kind of shoved under the carpet. And I think, like, let's take a step back for a second. Millions and millions of dollars and pounds all over the world was put to kind of research men, having better sex with Viagra, right? They were, putting huge amounts of money into that. And the woman going through menopause was always a thing that stoically we just dealt with and didn't complain or left the workforce. So there wasn't a generation that was kind of like standing up and saying, actually, no, this is the reality of what every single woman goes through. So it's been really interesting and also an unbelievable experience to be living through this revolution of, women actually talking about it. Because in my mom's life, nobody spoke about it.
Right.
And I'm driven in part by the experience my mother had, which was really, really sad. And she just did not cope very well with the perimenopause. She had a hysterectomy, went into like early menopause, wasn't treated properly. And unfortunately, she ended up taking her own life. And I'm driven by that to help women to understand. And then statistically, when you look at the biggest killer of women between 45 and 55, it's suicide. And that says a lot about what we're talking about, what we're not talking about. And I think the normalization of the conversation was absolutely the first thing that had to happen. And I'm pleased to say that that is starting to happen. It's been actually, interestingly, much more of a conversation in the UK than it has been in any other country, which is really interesting. Because in the US, they are actually, normally it's the other way around, but at this time, with this conversation, we are actually much further ahead than the US. And I think it's, the first thing is having the conversation and being able to have a conversation in the workplace, which is very important. And I think the other observation is that times have changed and they are changing. So I have a Gen Z daughter who will quite happily talk about having periods amongst, my son, anyone else, which I would never, ever have done in a million years. Not for big chunks of money would I ever have admitted that in like any situation. Just having tampons in the toilets at work, in the workplace, like this, it's becoming so much more normalized, thankfully.
Yeah.
But we need to be able to extend that conversation in the workplace where, if you're visibly pregnant and you're feeling a bit woozy or you're having a bad day or you feel fatigued, there'll be a place and people will be like, okay, go and take a break. Or, let me open the door for you, or, let me get you a glass of water. But, because the menopause happens and we stoically just let it happen and carry on as normal, and we are not talking about it, people don't know how to react. So I think the first thing is having the conversation and really, I think for every single woman to arm herself with enough knowledge to understand what's going on. And there's something that we do at Body Collective for both of our products, which is, so Baby to Body is the first product for the motherhood journey, and then M-Body is a hormonal health one. And which is this: we have 3 pillars of the way we speak to our customers and empowering them to understand what's going on. And that is, the first thing is, what is happening? And the next thing is, why is it happening? And the last thing is, how do I deal with it? So that empowers every single person with understanding what is going on with their body. And the idea is that those women really understand why that's happening, what's going on, and also how to mitigate it and how to live with it in terms of her lifestyle. And I think once you take the kind of the covers off and you start understanding what's going on, you start to build up a picture of your own body that somehow begins to gel with what you're feeling and what's happening. So it's about awareness, empowerment in terms of education, and really just having the conversation and having the courage to have that conversation in normal and working environments, that I think is so important. So what we do on our platforms is we take those myths and misconceptions away. We break it down into chunks of simple to understand conversational pieces of content that relate to each woman's specific experience. So every single woman has a different experience of everything. So your hormones have got a very different way of acting to mine. I've got a different DNA. Every single woman has a unique experience. So there's no one size fits all. So we can't tell every single woman what is happening with her body, but we can alert them and help them to understand how her body is reacting to certain things at certain times of the month, what she should be looking out for in terms of symptoms, understanding how those symptoms might respond to lifestyle changes like physical exercise and nutrition, more sleep, magnesium, simple supplementation, fresh air, sunlight, all the normal kind of things that you can actually do to improve your lifestyle. So it's breaking them down into small little chunks and also supplying that sort of personalized aspect of, this is what you're going through. This is absolutely something that every single woman goes through in the world. So not every woman goes through childbirth, but every single woman will go through menopause, whether they like it or not. Some people sail through. So practical. Yeah, some people sail through and never ever have a symptom. Like, I have friends who've just gone like, oh, I'm just postmenopausal. I didn't even realize it. I'm like, oh my God. I had like a huge amount of things. And I was also like, as Edi says, I was completely in the dark. And I was like literally a women's health advocate, and also was in the pandemic. And I was like, why am I feeling like this? And I had long COVID. So I put it down to long COVID. Meantime, not long COVID. It had nothing to do with long COVID. So, I also I'm driven by not wanting anyone else to, and especially like my daughter's generation to go through this without really having those conversations. And actually, I was with a friend yesterday and she said she's having all these symptoms. She's on HRT, and she said she had to show up at work last week, and it was so difficult because there were these unexplained symptoms. And she said, have I got flu, or is it just the perimenopause and the menopause? And, it turns out that we don't really know. Yeah. And there is no real way of knowing. And a lot of the time it's guesswork. And until there are more ways for us to diagnose, the simple things that we know will work, I think that guesswork takes a lot of our brain power away from us on a daily basis. So any tools, from my perspective, any tools that can help us to figure out what's going on are going to be helpful, to take that sort of, that whole side of like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. Well, here's something, and this is what you can use. So the tools that we've built are tools that are helpful, that are constructive, that are science-based, that you can track, you can monitor, you can integrate with your Apple Health or any other monitor you're wearing or wearable, and you can get real-time data on what is going on, why it's happening, and then also how to mitigate it with the things that you can do yourself.
Super important.
Yeah, and that puts the power back in the woman's hands.
Melinda, what about men? How do we help them? understand, considering we're still figuring some of this out? How do we help them to
So
understand some of this?
this is such an interesting question. So I belong to this entrepreneurs group, and we do these retreats a few times a year. So at a couple of them, we do like an on-conference style. So I put on the board that I was going to do a menopause talk. So the first time I did it, I had 70% men.
Impact. They're like, what's going
And
on?
I was like, what is happening here? And each one of those men stayed behind afterwards to have a word with me privately to say that they thought their wives were going through this and were, quote unquote, completely changed and completely crazy.
Wow.
So much so that one was about to, like, they were literally talking to lawyers about separating.
Mm.
And after my talk, and I start, obviously I did the same thing, explaining what can happen, the 67 symptoms, all of them were sitting there nodding and going, oh, wow, this is crazy. And none of them knew. But because I was there, because it was accessible, because all they had to do was turn up, their mates were coming, it suddenly took the sting out of that. And every single one of them has literally, like, one of them called me and said, I've saved his marriage. And the others are just so thankful that now they understand a little bit more. And I think it's a couple of them actually had to have the conversation with their wives. Their wives did not want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So they had to bring it up. But they are in a microcosm, a tiny little progressive, we're all entrepreneurs, so everybody's thinking outside the box. We're all like the type AAAs, the early adopters. So that's that type. But then what do we do with the rest of society?
Yeah.
And I think the more that we normalize it, where it's not woe is me, it's not feel sorry for me, it's not I need more time off, it's no, this is a natural thing that's going to happen. And men have menopause as well, they just don't actually understand what goes on, that this is a very natural thing. And then in order to retain us in the workplace, keep everybody happy and keep momentum going, they need to understand. It's like you'd understand more about DEI, right? How different people feel in different situations. It's exactly the same. And it shouldn't be seen as a disability. It should not be seen as a sickness. It should not be seen as anything other than something that happens. Like we have our periods, we have menopause, and basically we need people to be a little bit more understanding about going, that. But I also think that a lot of women kind of push it on men, and then they feel confused and scared, and that they're going to make, say the wrong things or something. I think we should just kind of take the pressure off, which I think will help. And just as long as women are talking about it more and talking about it when men are present, then that will start to unravel that whole mysticism of, wow, this is crazy. So if every single woman spoke to one man about it, then we wouldn't have a problem.
Talking is so important here. Edi, you obviously expand this conversation. Pick that up from me. How does it work for you?
Yeah. So I definitely, the way I approach this is there's two issues. One is to think about the difference about the healthcare conversation of menopause, which is entirely unique to each woman. Each female body has their own unique signature through the menopause transition. And then to think also about a leadership conversation around menopause, which is also unique, but is also then a collective conversation, because we are working usually in the context of organizations. There's cultures in the organization, and there are some common symptoms of menopause that are likely to particularly impact our leadership above and beyond or separate from all of the particular healthcare issues that we might have. So brain fog is the one, I hate that term, brain fog, cognitive changes that happen. There's no specific medical term for this yet, but this sense that your brain is not working quite the same way. I've had a lot of women say, oh my God, I thought I was getting dementia, because I can't quite remember the same way, or I'm not tracking in some way, but this is particularly true during the perimenopause years where there's the most intense hormonal fluctuation. And also the changes to our mood, a little bit more potentially volatile mood for some women in this process, and potentially a bit less energy because our bodies are in transformation, right? And so if we think about these sorts of symptoms and think about how they influence our leadership and how we meet those in the context of the workplace, and we are able to talk about them, then that changes our experience of them. We know that 30 to 40% of our experience of menopause symptoms is actually influenced by our mindset about our menopause symptoms. So it has a big impact. And we also know from research that's just growing that when women claim their experience and say, this is the experience I'm having, for example, with hot flashes, if you're in a meeting and you have a hot flash and it becomes visible, we have two choices, right? We have a choice to step in and say, I'm having a hot flash, I'm fine, just give me a minute, maybe take off our jacket or our scarf or open the window or whatever, and then come back to the experience. Or we might have the impulse to shrink and to try to hide, like to be embarrassed or try not to let that be visible. And we know from research that the claiming it helps us keep our power, right? It doesn't matter whether or not we're in menopause. It doesn't matter whether or not we're having a hot flash. It matters how we meet that experience and how we meet that in the context of our collective. So thinking about these aspects as well helps us in the context of the workplace. And so the program that I've built has, I think of it as a two-pronged approach. One is this sort of 5-session deep dive for women, cohorts of women, to create a conversation, to create community, to create the awareness that Melinda talked about. So what is actually happening, to get the education, but also then to explore practices that help us meet the experience so that it helps us grow, the transformational practices of meeting the experience, making sense of it, and then moving through. But that's only half of the conversation. Then the other half is a shorter session that is appropriate for everybody in the context of the workplace, particularly managers, men and women, anybody who, and that's anybody is everybody, right? Who is going to be kind of come up against menopause in the context of the workplace. So we break the stigma about it. We create a holistic conversation about menopause so that it's not only healthcare, but also about identity and relationship and meaning and purpose, and therefore our leadership. And we put that in a developmental frame so that it's a positive engagement rather than, what is a real impulse to make this be like a disability, to make this be something that, oh, we have to take care of women again in this, in the context of the workplace. That's not what this is about. This is about claiming the power. And so I'll just end this little piece with, I think there, we talk about leadership and development in a way that many people think, I'm an adult, I'm 40 years old, I'm at the peak of my leadership, I know about conscious communications, or I know about negotiation, or I know all the things with regard to being a successful leader. But I firmly believe that living through and meeting fully the experience of menopause brings us to even a fuller level of leadership, where we bring our wisdom, where we bring a quality of presence, where we bring a deeper commitment to what we care about rather than to all of the busyness. Right? And so that's, I really want to, it's important to me to celebrate that in the context of this conversation, because it so often becomes, like oh, we just have to help women muddle through this time. I'm like, no, we are growing and we are coming out and through this powerhouses.
This is why I'm loving this conversation with both of you, because we are, as I said, a transformational time, right? This is not like it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. It's also not what it's like in the next 5 years. So if I think about myself as a leader or manager, not in menopause, right? Pretty much every single person on my team is going to have to go through it in some shape or form. Obviously, every woman's going to go through it physically, and some will coast through, as you said, and some are going to have an awful lot of symptoms. So there's going to be a complete variation there. But as you, Linda, rightly pointed out as well, every man goes through this as well. First of all, in their own male menopause, which is quite different and mild, but also they're living and working with women. So whether whether it's your partner or your friend or your sister or your boss or your colleague, every single person has to deal
or
with
your
menopause.
mother
Or your mother, right? So, so we have to, thankfully, we have to have a conversation around it, which is, I think we're actively doing this. So help me tease out though, what does best practice look like? So last year, as I mentioned prior to this conversation, I think two of my team were going through it, completely different experiences, also completely different awarenesses. And we were in we were in a medical device technology company. So this is a very educated, high performing team, but yet I, as a manager and leader, didn't have any tools in place to support them. So let's think about the future. Best case scenario, we as women all have a tool that's helping us understand what's happening for us. So looking at the Body Collective or the Empower, we're tracking and trending our health, our bodies, and where we're trending. At the same time, we should be looking at having this conversation, Edi, as a group of women, first off, to make sure we're teasing through the science, but also at the same time, having a collective meeting as the entire population, male and female. Is that best practice? Is that what we say the future should be? What are we missing in that? And also, Edi, I want to tease more into that framework, because I'm loving the fact that there's a framework around this, knowing that this is reality. We can't just ignore it and let women, suffer through menopause, and then as Melinda pointed out, ending in, I don't know what to do, I don't know my body, I don't feel like I have support, and as you said, suicide is an option, unfortunately. So let's completely avoid that track. Help me more, Edi, in terms of that framework, because I really want to be, as a manager leader, that's a really powerful tool that I, as a manager leader, can pick up and utilize with you and with the team. So give me some more information there, please.
Sure. So any transformation that we go through has 3 stages, right? We have and requires 3 different types of inner skills to meet it. So the first we might think of as managing the transformation, just meeting it fully and managing it. And this is where I think we need to understand what all the symptoms are that we might be facing, like like vertigo, for example, frozen shoulder, hives, weird feelings in your mouth, on top of hot flashes, on top of brain fog. And so just to be aware of all of the things that can happen, and then to understand the kind of basic lifestyle practices that can help in that. And in the context of the workplace, flexibility is one of the biggest things, right? Just a little bit of like being able to open a window or being able to come in a little bit later and work in hours that suit your body, being able to wear the clothes that work for you. If the issue of uniforms is a really big one for many many people in the context of the workplace. So just meeting and managing, not being in denial, not being naive about what's happening, but being aware. So there's just a level of awareness that the work that I do and obviously the work that Melinda is offering is so helpful with. And then the second quality of meeting menopause as a transformation is really to make sense of what's happening. And this is going to be different for everybody. People ask me, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Whether it's you going through it or whether it's a manager. And the truth is there's no one size fits all. This really brings us back into ourselves. And one of the reasons I share my story of kind of this career of letting goes, right? Of like, this isn't quite right for me, letting it all go and starting into something new, is that the issue of how we meet our leadership, what it means for us as we go through menopause, might mean we want to at least temporarily take a step back, might mean we want to pivot, might mean we want something different, might mean we think about things differently. And for each of us, it's going to have a different implication. And so not demonizing any of those choices, right? For some of us, it's going to be like, yes, I want to lean in. For others of us, it's going to be, it's time for a little bit of I call it a menopause sabbatical, to kind of understand what I really care about and what move forward. And then that third step is really to move forward, to figure out, like, to allow ourselves not to be stuck, to grieve what, once we make sense of where we are, to grieve where we have been and where we are no longer, and then from that place move forward, right? So that we don't try to resist what's happening, and we allow the new to arrive. And Grace, this is really, like, as a leader or as a manager, these are unique conversations that you can have with each person on your team, but creating the space for care, for then making sense, and then allowing what is right to move forward would be the three big buckets that I would be thinking about.
I love that. And some people are going to be very open and transparent. Some people aren't. I definitely prefer my privacy. I typically don't share stuff at work unless there's unless they know me, but also this might be something I'm comfortable with, it might not. But to your point, as a leader, I'm more opening up the opportunity, and then it's with that individual to share what's relevant and what they're comfortable with, and what doesn't require any changes from a work perspective. As you mentioned, uniform has been a good example, because not everyone works in the typical scenario where I do, where it's, you work whenever, wherever, you wear what you wear, but not everyone has that luxury. I appreciate. Melinda, add to that for me, because I want to, again, get to what does best practice look like?
So I think, going back to the uniqueness of everyone's experience, and to your point of some people wanting to share and others not, I think it's difficult to have a kind of one size fits all. And I think in this comes back to kind of culture of an organization. If culture is part of your culture is care, space, and allowing people to have the experience that they're going to have in their own bodies, whatever that means, then you foster this kind of this space or this place where people can feel that they can actually talk about something. Doesn't have to be publicly, but they could actually speak to their line manager, or and want something different. But I think it's encouraging people to know that they can speak up if they want to, that there are things in place. And a very, very simple thing, and these are questions we get on our, because we have an AI health coach, a health assistant called Bella on our apps, and Bella's available to anyone. You can ask any question at all. And by far the most questions we get around, how do I tell my company? How do I tell my boss? How do I start the conversation? How do I, what are my rights in terms of like pregnancy, conception, IVF, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause? It's the same kind of thing, right? It comes down to, I'm going through this. I need some, different guardrails here in terms of my work. And how do I have that conversation? So we do have a lot of kind of workplace kind of guidelines, and it's just really comes from a human perspective and not a legal perspective. But I think if every company can have some guidelines somewhere in their kind of book of like, this is how you work for our company and this is what we expect, that includes menopause, then you've got a starting point. You've got a place where you can go and go, yeah, that okay, now I see what I can do. And it can be super simple. Have a chat with your line manager or HR, or, here's like, a different, somehow this is how you can frame it. That it automatically is a tool. So we do have that on our app and on our website, and it is available for anyone to see. And then also Ask the AI. Our AI can give you like 5 different ways to have the conversation because we've trained it like that, because we get this so often. So there are tools out there. You just need to look for them. And not everybody's going to be able to have the conversation. Some people work in huge companies where, you know, any kind of weakness, and I'm not saying that menopause is a weakness, but it can be seen to be a weakness by others, could be really detrimental to getting on a project if you're in a consulting firm, to getting a promotion, to, you know, so there's lots of different reasons and multi-layers of why people don't want to have those conversations. So it's kind of systematically building into the values of the business is the one side, but then also legally, or like kind of in terms of the guidelines for how you act in the company, of what that means. And I bet you every single company's got a pregnancy kind of protocol,
Policy,
right?
yeah.
So
Have
a
to have, I'm
policy,
pretty
thank
sure,
you, a
legally.
policy, yeah. Why don't we have that about menopause?
Right.
Just have a policy about menopause. There we go.
Take
That's
calls to
automatically makes every single company think about it. And that's what you need to, that's exactly what you need to start off. And then you've got a place to go. Okay, what is the policy here? Let me have a look at it. Where do I fit in, and how do I have this conversation? So it comes down to, and I think, you know, the other thing is confidence, right? Like women will, you know, a lot of women don't want to have these conversations because they don't want anyone to be asking them more questions about their bodies, or, you know, don't want to dive into it. They're very, very private. So it almost comes down to kind of empowering women to have the confidence to have these conversations, because we're normalizing it, which comes back to our first point of it's much more normal now, which is great, but we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things we talk about often is being comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I appreciate that there's lots of people listening to this going, God, I just don't know enough. And you're like, you don't need to know everything. And I think that's one
No,
of the
you don't.
takeaways
Yeah.
I keep saying is,
You don't need to know anything, really.
none of us know all the details here. This is a still relatively early research topic, and we're all trying to find our way through it. And from a business perspective, this is why I'm so excited about this conversation. You both bring very practical tools to use today, making it, as said, not one size fits all, but customized to the person and customized to the team and to the manager. So it's a very important toolkit that we need to implement in business today, not in 5 years' time when you're behind the curve and you possibly have already had issues, or women that have left the business because they didn't feel comfortable, or managers that left the business because they're like, I don't know what to do with this conversation, they don't understand. So now is the time to do that. So some simple call to actions there. And I think, as you mentioned, the policy, and you've one's already available. Perfect. Absolutely brilliant.
I think so. One more thing, I'd
Go
love
ahead.
to just bring this up. I think there's something here where you got to think about your audience, right? So whenever you're doing anything, like the first thing I think about when I'm doing a talk is like, who's in the audience? What do they want to know? How do I need to speak to them? And when it's mainly men, I go with the facts, the stats and the facts, because they are much more sort of orientated towards the stats and the facts. If I hit them with emotions or feelings, probably not going to go down that well. So you hit them with the facts of, you know, this is how many people have it. These are the things. This is why. This is actually what menopause is. You break it down into those simple to understand elements of like, estrogen does this, it starts declining, this is the result, this is what happens. It's not a simple line, it's up and down. Then they get it. And I've seen in these workshops that I've done where men go, oh, that explains it, and the penny drops, and it's just like, wow, this is amazing. So, you know, when it's with women, you can then appeal to how they feel, their experience of it, you know, because they know what a hot flush means. Men don't.
Right,
you can say hot flush and they think it's made up. So I think if you hit them with the science, you hit them with the stats, the data, then they start to understand what does that actually mean. So that for me has been a really effective way of getting the point across to men and women. Some women are very analytical and they're not part of it at the moment. They're not experiencing it. They're like, what do you mean? Like, how does this go? Like, I'm not going to do that. I handle everything. I'm like a super gym bunny, and I know exactly what's going on in my body. And then, you explain actually what could happen, and it can hit
That's
them.
the way my mind is at right now. I've got
Grace, that's
I'm like,
you.
I'm going to power through this. I'm going to be fine.
Honestly, that was me too. I was just like, this is never going to affect me. I'm super fit. I'm super healthy. I eat well. I drink. Honestly, it was just like,
We're delusional.
what
I
is
know.
going on?
I
Had
accept my
zero control over what went on.
Let's step up a level a second, because both of you guys are not only experienced leaders, but also experienced board members as well. So let's go up to the board level. What's the conversation with the board, with who is, not delivering one-to-ones or not delivering performance management or teamwork at the moment, but ultimately at that strategy level, thinking of culture and so on. What's the conversation at that level? What should they be thinking of? Is it likewise, first off, policy? We need a policy. That's the first directive they can take as part of the board direction. What else is the conversation for a board director? Edi, do you right now work with board directors as well and executive teams, or is it still at the executive level?
Primarily at the executive level, but the conversation there mirrors what we've just been talking about. This yes, let's have a policy. Let's create awareness, because that's really right now. Fundamental awareness is the key issue. I think very quickly that may no longer be the key issue, but right now, women in the context of the workplace are starving for like a real live person to talk about, or a wonderful AI companion to talk about about this. And so I'll share that when we, in one of the first organizations that I worked with several years ago, people had been telling me, why are you starting this? I'm not, like, my consultant friends are like, I haven't been hearing the pain point around menopause. Like, no one, like my clients aren't telling me they have a pain around menopause. And we launched the Be Your Power program on a Friday to the organization. And by Monday, we had 100 women who had signed up. So, like, women are desperate for this conversation. And so I think keeping that in mind, you as an executive, you may not have heard it yet. I actually was talking with one chief people officer on Friday, and he said, yeah, this was really abstract for me. I was like, it seems like maybe a fad. But then I had a particular issue come up, and the intersection of behavior issue and maybe menopause, like, he wanted to take it really carefully to understand fully, so he could, as he said, bring grace before judgment, right? To understand the fullness of the context. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for awareness in this space.
I love the fact that both of you work with people directly, so you present to groups. So for the leaders and the board directors listening, they can be like, I'm just going to start the conversation and bring in an expert to start the conversation, help guide us through this. So thankfully both of you are available to do that, which I think is powerful. Melinda, from the board, what way are you approaching the same story? Is it you're talking through the conversation like you did with the entrepreneur founder group?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really just kind of making people aware that this could be a potential problem. So, for example, on one board, on the audit, I was chairing the audit and risk committee, which sounds very dry, which it kind of is, until I started bringing in sort of, safeguarding, which is part of the risks of an organization, and personal health and well-being, and putting menopause as a subject matter on, or a topic on the agenda was suddenly like, oh, we had, nobody had thought that. So I think the more that we become leaders and we take those spaces on boards, I am committed to always doing something like that I can actually pinpoint to say, look, we need to look at this in a different way, and we need to start thinking about this. So if every single woman on a board would do that once, we'd have, some progress. And then if all those men whose wives, daughters, mothers, whatever, aunts, sisters are going through this, which they may be at some point, if each one of them brought that to the board, then we would have a very different conversation. We would have a movement of how industry and the workplace is better able to adapt to and help us to adapt to these things. And it doesn't need to be a huge amount of change. I mean, like I never really, stopped working, or, it doesn't have to be. And I mean, Edi, it's great if you can take a sabbatical, but I've never been able to do that. I'm a startup founder. There's no chance. I can't take one day off. Like it just doesn't happen. So, how do you adapt around that? Which is really just listening to your body and having the power to say, well, look, today I can't do anything. I need to just go for a walk in the park, or I need to just decompress, but I'll make up the time by doing X, Y, and Z on another day. So it's allowing yourself first, and then others around you, that grace and that space, and understanding that, everyone has a bad day at some point, but some of us have a few more if we're going through the menopause, and we may need a little more grace.
I love the fact that my name keeps coming up in different
contexts.
I
know. I was just going to say that. It's such a lovely name.
But Melinda, I love what you're saying there, actually, because it's really, really practical. Like the risk register, every board has a risk register and obviously reviews it or should review it at least once a year, if not once every 6 months. But people is a risk no matter what business you're in, no matter what industry you're in. Attracting talent, keeping talent, and culture are key on every single risk register. And if talking about menopause is acknowledged as the risk and an opportunity, or they're not talking about it as definitely a risk, then it's important to put something in that agenda. So maybe that's a way to get it to the board conversation in a very practical, tangible way. Edi, what do you think?
Because
sorry,
you can lose your top talent, right?
Right.
It's a huge drain that organizations are not aware of, that they're losing their most precious resources. The senior women leaders are, women on average retire 7.4 years earlier than men. And when they do, half of them cite health reasons. And I hear that and I think menopause, right? 1 in 4 women consider quitting their job because of unaddressed menopause symptoms, because they don't have the awareness, they don't have the care and support. And some ungodly number of hours per week are spent during the menopause transition less productively, because we're searching around for healthcare, which currently doesn't exist. So Melinda, I'm so excited. I want to talk to you more about Bella and hear about how that can be of help to individual women. But the stats, like the business case for menopause in the workplace, is really strong. The Mayo Clinic did a study here in New York, but looking globally, something like $150 billion worth of lost productivity because of unaddressed menopause. That's not because of menopause, right? That's because we're not meeting it with the awareness. So that's a huge drain for any organization.
That's ridiculous. I did not know that stat. That's mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. So
wow.
If anyone listening is managing the risk register, if it's not on it, get on it, because this is, the business case is clear, the risk is clear, the cost is clear, and it's an obvious one. We're at the point now where it's not a taboo. So you can open the conversation, you can put it on the agenda, and you can start the process of what's our policy, what's our culture, what way do we want to deal with this? How do we open up Edi, you said grace before judgment, create grace before judgment. I love that, by the way.
I love that as well.
I'm copying that one. So conscious now that we've talked about the executive, so I as a leader or manager, have got a little bit more tools in my toolkit. So thank you both. Also, as a board director, I've got more tools, and I have a step-by-step of what to do next. That's been super, super important. Before we move on to calling out some existing leaders and how great what they've done and how everything else, is there anything else, Edi, that you say, what, as a leader listening, or as a manager listening, or as a board director listening, here's something else you need to think about or to know? Like, what's the number one thing that we've either talked about already or that we haven't talked about yet that we need to call out during this conversation?
Well, for me, what I care about most is this idea that we are growing in our leadership throughout every era of our life, and that as a 40-year young woman, we are not yet at the peak of our leadership, and that menopause is an experience that can help us grow into the peak of our leadership.
I love it. Great call out. Melinda, can you add to that?
Yeah, I think having gone through it recently, I think what's really interesting is that it's a beginning of something, right? It's, for me, I see it as a new time in my life. And I had this argument with my son, who's like a millennial, a few months ago, and I said, it's very difficult for older people in the workplace. And he said, "What are you talking about? You guys earn a ton of money for just showing up." And then I realized actually we do, because we have the wisdom, we have the experience, we come in, we tell, we have all of that. It's not an hourly rate anymore, right? It's more about all of that stuff. So that is the power that we have. And going into that next phase of our lives, knowing that we have that experience, the skills, the wisdom of having seen so many situations and having gone through so many situations in our lives, and how that can empower us. I think if you just change your mindset and understand that that is the power, and you're stepping into more power at this point in your life, and that all of that represents, it's changing the narrative in your head, changing the expectation around you, making people understand that actually it's the beginning, it's not the end, and we're not washed up and dried out and sitting on the sidelines anymore. That is not happening. And we're actually stepping into our most productive years in some ways, right? With more grown-up kids and able to do things better and, more, quicker, faster. And, I think we're reaching just the tip of the iceberg in terms of our earning potential. So yeah, that's what I think.
And
Turn it
I just
around.
Totally want to piggyback on that, is the peak of our influence, right?
Yeah.
I love it. And you guys are definitely leading the way. So thank you so much. I'm genuinely excited about the next 24 months, 3 years in particular. So having this not to be a taboo, but also having tools and having practical steps of what to do, and taking away some of the mystique around the research and the lack of research or the noise with it. So thank you both. One last question for both of you. As powerful, influential leaders, I want to call out and highlight and spotlight other leaders doing amazing work. So for both of you, who are the other leaders I should be aware of, we should be aware of as a group of listeners, of leaders and people in the industry, of anything got to do with fitness and health and leadership and so on? Edi, who should we spotlight that we should all be well aware of? Who's doing amazing work?
Well, I want to spotlight two groups. One is, I want to spotlight Amy Fox of the Mobius Executive Leadership. If you don't know Amy or Mobius, they're definitely put her and them on your radar. Powerful postmenopausal transformational leadership work, like changing the world in the best sort of way. And then I also want to call out Tiffany and Estelle, who founded Hot Cognition, AI-supported sales process, who are really enabling the word to get out, and to enable leaders to make a bigger impact more quickly. And so those are two groups that I just wanted to bring to the fore.
Super call outs. Thank you so much. And I will definitely be asking for introductions to both those, because they sound phenomenal and not in my network and not in my awareness right now. So great call outs. Melinda, who would you like to spotlight?
So I'm going to go with something that's interesting. So firstly, Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
So if you listen to her and what she has to say, she is 86.
Wow.
And she is 86. And she has always focused on, her exercise, her well-being, her physical and her mental health. And she is an absolute legend and a phenomenon. And I think if we can all think about what she does as an 86-year-old, then there's no excuse for anyone. And then the other two people that always come to mind is, when I hear a lot of women saying, yeah, but I'm too old. And I'm like, Arianna Huffington, she started another business in her, late 60s? Louise Hay started her publishing company in her 70s. So, those kinds of like, you just can put that out there. And I say this all the time. And look, if you had to, like, you can Google Jane Fonda and see her on gazillion podcasts, walking around, weightlifting, being, completely present and there. And, how many other 86-year-olds can you say that are able to do that? So I just think those are phenomenal. And then I think you, Grace, you have been a trailblazer ever since I've known you. And what you've done in the last few years, I'm always impressed by, and your energy and enthusiasm to do these things, to bring the conversation, to have these conversations, and put in so much effort. So I'm going to switch the spotlight back on you and say thank you for doing all of you're doing and bringing all of these conversations and putting so much energy and effort into this.
Oh, well, thank you. And of course, as typical Irish, I can't take a compliment, so I'm just going to say it's all about you. No, but ladies, thank you so much. This has been really powerful. And I have no doubt people listening are going to take away a whole bunch of tools and ideas and calls to actions. And I think it's super important. Now is the time to put action into or tools into action. So it's phenomenal. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to getting this out to the audience, as well as amplifying it, because I think the both of you, I want to get back to actually walk through more of your tools and how you do it. And I'd love to do something interactive with a collective of leaders across the world, as well as across industry, as well as across age, as well as across gender, as well as ethnicity, to bring this to life as much as we can, so that as you go into companies, individual companies, and deliver what you do, how do we do it on a scale for people, whether they're working in freelance or they're working as individuals or consultants? So we make sure we amplify it as much as possible. But thank you both, and thank you both for highlighting more women doing amazing work in the world. We have so much progress to make, so there's no end to this journey. We'll be back here again, I've no doubt, in 10 years' time with a different problem, solving it, have a different conversation. Hopefully after menopause is just another normal conversation with loads of tools and solutions in place. But ladies, again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can connect the dots with others by sharing this podcast with colleagues and teammates. At wearethecollective.world, you can join a professional network, avail of professional development, and engage your support team. We collaborate on the shared pursuit for gender balance in health and business. Until next time, keep connecting the dots.